My mother threw a cake in my face, a full chocolate buttercream still cold from the bakery box I'd carried in just 40 minutes earlier. It hit square between my eyes. For a split second, there was laughter. Real laughter from someone. Then silence, thick and stunned. Cream dripped down my nose onto my blouse and pooled on the floor. No one moved. No one gasped. I looked around, hoping someone would say something that it had gone too far, but my father looked away, and my sister wiped a fake tear from the corner of her eye. I picked up my purse, still sticky from frosting, and walked out of my parents' dining room. No one followed. I don't know why the silence hurt more than the cake. Maybe because I brought it. Maybe because I'd spent $48.75 on it that morning from a little shop near my new place, the one Mom said she liked. Maybe because I thought it was the only thing I could bring that might count as peace. The frosting had soaked into the collar of my shirt by the time I reached my car. I didn't cry. Not yet. I turned the ignition with shaking hands and backed out of the driveway like a fugitive. The cake was still on my skin. Sugar cream, chocolate humiliation. It wasn't the first time they'd made me feel like I didn't belong. It was just the first time they'd used dessert to drive the point home. Back at my apartment, I locked the door, leaned against it, and slid down to the floor. The overhead lights were too harsh. I turned them off. In the dark, the frosting started to dry, pulling at the corners of my mouth. I still hadn't wiped it off. My shoes left chocolate prints on the tile. I didn't care. At some point, I made it to the bathroom and stared into the mirror. I looked ridiculous. My mother's daughter, the successful accountant, the girl with a $300,000 condo and no mortgage. The one who wasn't invited to Thanksgiving last year because Emma deserved the focus. Now the girl with cake in her face. I peeled off the blouse, dropped it in the sink, and watched the frosting melt under warm water. I didn't bother with the rest. I sat on the floor in an old college t-shirt and opened the kitchen cabinet. Empty. I'd forgotten to go shopping this week, or last. Didn't matter. Eventually, I pulled down the box I kept above the fridge. It was one of the last things I'd brought from my old apartment, just a shoebox. Inside, a wrinkled receipt from my first paycheck at the firm, a key from my childhood bedroom that no longer fit any lock, and an embroidered cloth handkerchief with my name stitched in crooked thread. Rachel, I made it at summer camp when I was 7. My mother packed it into my suitcase, told me to always keep it close just in case. She said it was for emergencies. It was the only thing in the box that didn't smell like dust. I held it to my face, still sticky with icing, and whispered, "So here we are, Mom. An emergency." I was 8 when I realized my name didn't mean much in our family. It was a Thursday. Emma had just won second place in her school's coloring contest. A sheet of sunflowers, mostly yellow-colored outside the lines. My mother taped it to the refrigerator like it was a museum piece. That same week, I'd come home with a district-level math certificate. I placed it on the kitchen counter. It stayed there for 2 days until Dad used it to balance a wobbly table leg. That's how it started. Quiet omissions, small disappearances. A name left out of introductions. A skipped birthday. A forgotten recital. I wasn't unloved exactly. Just unnecessary. I think that's worse. Emma was 3 years younger than me with soft curls and a voice like a songbird. She cried easily and laughed loudly and had the kind of emotional range that made grown-ups melt. I, on the other hand, was quiet, practical, organized. I preferred books to people and memorized the Dewey Decimal System just for fun. At family dinners, Emma always sat between Mom and Dad. I sat at the edge of the table next to Great Aunt Merrill, who smelled like peppermint and never remembered my name. When we both had performances the same weekend, Emma's dance recital and my debate finals, guess which one my parents attended? "We can't be in 2 places at once, honey," Mom said. "You understand, right?" I did. I always did. At 16, I passed my driver's test on the first try. I came home, excited, waving the little laminated card in my hand. Emma got a car the next year for her birthday, new silver with a bow on top. I got a used bike 2 years prior. When I asked why Dad said Emma needs to get to her cheer practice, that's harder without wheels. As if my part-time job and tutoring sessions didn't count. I stopped asking after that. College came. I worked 2 jobs, ate canned soup, and graduated summa cum laude in accounting. Emma dropped out of her first semester, said she wanted to find herself. Mom helped her move into a loft with a friend, paid 6 months of rent up front. I didn't blame Emma. It wasn't her fault she was the favorite. She didn't ask for it. She just learned how to swim in the current that always pulled me under. There were quiet moments, though, when the truth burned too brightly to ignore. Like the time I showed up to Easter dinner wearing a navy pantsuit after a big promotion and Mom said, "That's a strong look. Emma could never pull that off." She meant it as a compliment, I think. Or the time Emma hosted a Friendsgiving at her apartment and forgot to invite me. It was more of a college crowd thing, she explained. I was 28. Still, I kept showing up, bringing wine, offering help, remembering birthdays. I didn't want recognition anymore. I just didn't want to be erased. The worst part wasn't the forgetting. It was the expecting that I'd be there, that I'd understand, that I'd fill in the gap without ever asking for anything back. They never asked if I had enough. They just assumed I'd never ask for more. Back in my apartment, I ran my fingers over the old handkerchief again. Rachel. The stitching had unraveled a little at the corners. I thought of that summer at camp, the way Mom folded my clothes so carefully, the way she wrote notes on napkins back when I was still the only child. Back when she still looked at me like I was enough. I wondered when I disappeared, and who exactly she thought I had become. I stopped trying to be included. Somewhere between college and my second tax season, I learned to make peace with the silence. I poured everything into work spreadsheets, forecasts, retirement plans for people I'd never meet. Numbers were honest. They didn't forget you. They didn't play favorites. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a storage unit. It had one window, 3 working outlets, and neighbors who argued through thin walls, but it was mine, and it was cheap enough that I could save half my income. I packed lunches, reused tea bags, and declined every vacation invite. When Emma posted beach selfies in Tulum, I was updating ledgers under fluorescent lights. When my coworkers went to happy hour, I brought tax code to a laundromat. People thought I was driven, focused. The truth was simpler. I didn't have anyone to fall back on. I couldn't afford to coast. 8 years in, I had enough. Between my salary, careful investing, and a modest inheritance from my grandmother, I scraped together $300,000. I bought a 2-bedroom condo in a transitional neighborhood, not trendy but safe with creaky floors and good bones. No mortgage, no cosigner, no debt. It wasn't fancy. The kitchen was stuck in 1992. The walls had textured wallpaper that looked like it had seen a few divorces. But when I turned the key, it clicked. And for once, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space from someone else's life. I painted the walls myself, scrubbed the grout with a toothbrush, watched YouTube videos on electrical wiring. Every blister, every sore muscle felt like a receipt, proof that I'd earned square footage. When I told my parents Mom just said 2 bedrooms, that's a lot of space for one person. I smiled, said nothing. Maybe she didn't mean it as judgment, maybe she did. I still called on Sundays, still sent birthday cards, still brought wine to family dinners even when they forgot I was coming. When I finally invited Emma to see the apartment, she said, "Wow, you really don't have a headboard." Then she laughed as if I'd just told a joke. That was 2 weeks before the call. "Sweetheart," Mom said, syrup in her voice. "Can you come by next Saturday? We're having a little family gathering. Bring one of those chocolate cakes from that bakery near your place. You know the one I like?" I paused mid-paint stroke, the bathroom ceiling still half covered in primer. Is something wrong? Of course not. Just a surprise. Come by, around 4. I should have known. I should have heard it in her voice, the way she pushed sweetness like a spoonful of medicine. But I said yes, picked up the cake, showed up on time. Because even after all this time, I still wanted to believe that doing everything right would finally mean I belonged. The house looked the same from the outside. 2-story colonial white shutters, rose bushes trimmed too neatly. It was the house my grandmother left to Emma and me. We'd let our parents stay in it after she passed. It never felt like a favor until now I parked behind Uncle Greg's pickup. There were more cars than I expected. Aunt Linda's red Buick, Cousin Josh's Jeep. Even Emma's boyfriend Kevin had managed to snag a spot in the driveway. This wasn't a small gathering. I stepped inside the cake, balanced carefully in my hands. "Rachel's here." Mom called, her voice bright and rehearsed. She swooped in, kissed my cheek, and took the cake like I was delivering a prop. Perfect timing. We're just sitting down. The living room was filled with familiar faces, all dressed like it was Thanksgiving. Emma sat on the couch, Kevin's hand resting protectively over hers. My father leaned against the fireplace chatting with Uncle Greg. The air smelled like pot roast and polite tension. "What's going on?" I asked Emma as I passed. She smiled vaguely. "You'll see." That should have been the warning. But I followed everyone to the dining room where Mom had laid out her best china, the kind with gold trim she only used for holidays. The cake I brought was placed in the center like a crown. Dinner passed in staged conversation. Everyone was careful, almost rehearsed. Nobody asked me about my apartment. Nobody asked me about anything. Halfway through mashed potatoes, Mom tapped her spoon against a glass. "I want to thank you all for coming," she said, beaming. "We have some wonderful news." Her eyes sparkled as she looked at Emma. "Our Emma is pregnant," she announced. The room erupted in applause. I clapped too. Despite everything, I was happy for her, maybe even proud. She'd always wanted to be a mom. And Mom continued. "She and Kevin are getting engaged. Wedding planning starts next month." More cheers. Kevin smiled like he'd won something. Emma flushed with well-practiced modesty. I leaned over. "Congratulations," I said to her, and I meant it. But then Mom raised her hand again. "That's not all." The room quieted. A few forks paused mid-air. "As you all know, Rachel recently purchased a beautiful apartment," Mom said, gesturing to me like I was part of a silent auction. "It's a 2-bedroom, very spacious. Perfect location." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "She's single," Mom added with a soft laugh. "No kids, no pets, no obligations." And there it was. Emma lowered her eyes. Kevin stared at his plate. My stomach turned. "Emma and Kevin need a home," Mom said, her voice smoothing into something practiced. "Not some rental downtown. They're starting a family." Then she looked directly at me. "Rachel, sweetheart, this is your chance to show how much you love your sister. I think you should give them your apartment." The words landed like broken glass. A collective inhale passed around to the table. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You can rent again," she added almost cheerfully. "You don't need all that space." Dad nodded in agreement. Kevin still said nothing. Emma finally looked at me, wide-eyed, pleading, embarrassed. "That's a wonderful idea," Aunt Linda chimed in. "Family helps family." I looked at the cake, the one I bought. My hands were cold. "You're not serious," I said. "Oh, but I am," Mom replied. "Emma needs it more than you." And that's when I stood up. That's when the table began to splinter, not physically, but quietly along fault lines that had always been there, and none of them even flinched. The night after the dinner, I didn't sleep. I stripped out of my clothes, still faintly smelling of pot roast and chocolate frosting, and sat on the floor of my apartment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there frozen like I was waiting for my body to catch up to what had happened. By morning, I had a plan. I pulled out the shoebox from above my fridge, the one with my old receipts, broken keys, and childhood keepsakes, and found what I was looking for. My grandmother's will. It wasn't a long document, just a few notarized pages. But right there in black ink, it said, "The house at 742 Carson Lane shall be transferred equally to my granddaughters, Rachel Monroe and Emma Monroe." Our parents had no legal claim. They had been living there by permission, not by right. At 9:12 a.m., I called a lawyer. Jeremy Blackwell was sharp-eyed, mid-50s, and efficient. He listened quietly as I explained everything: the house, the apartment, the dinner, the cake. His mouth twitched once, almost a smile. "You want to force the sale?" he asked. "I want options," I said. "I want boundaries." He nodded. "You're well within your rights." We drafted a formal notice. Emma could buy out my half at market value, or the house would be listed and sold. Either way, I was done letting people live in places they hadn't earned. 5 days later, I got a text. "You ungrateful little bitch! How can you do this to your family? You're trying to make your pregnant sister homeless." It didn't stop there. That evening, they came to my door. My mother, my father, Emma, Kevin. They banged, they shouted, they pleaded, then they threatened. I didn't open the door. I pressed record on my phone. 14 minutes and 22 seconds of pure boiling chaos. After everything we've done for you, you never understood family. We should have left you out of the will. I emailed the recording to Jeremy. He called back the next morning. This is harassment, he said, but it's also leverage. A week later, I received a letter from their attorney. They wanted to mediate. The meeting was scheduled for Monday, 10 a.m. at Jeremy's office. I arrived early, dressed in my navy pantsuit, the one Emma once mocked. I didn't care. I sat straight, hands folded, eyes calm. They walked in 10 minutes late. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. Emma looked like she hadn't slept. Kevin scowled. My father looked through me. The lawyers began. Facts, numbers, terms. Their attorney argued that selling the house would cause undue emotional hardship. Jeremy presented the will, the audio recording and screenshots of my mother's Facebook post, the one where she asked people to pray for me. Midway through the meeting, my mother did something unexpected. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small folded cloth, the handkerchief, the same one I had stitched my name into at summer camp, the one she packed for me when I was 7. She placed it gently on the table. I kept this, she said softly. All these years I looked at it. The edges were frayed. The thread had faded. You used to need me, she whispered. I took a breath, then I opened my own folder and removed something else, the silver ring she gave me when I graduated. I placed it next to the handkerchief. I don't anymore, I said. Silence. The lawyers resumed. Final terms were read aloud. The house would be sold. Profits split. No more discussion. Before we left, I looked at my mother one last time. You didn't lose a daughter, I said quietly. You lost your source. Then I stood up and walked out. The house sold faster than expected. It was a seller's market in the old colonial on Carson Lane, with its polished hardwood mature trees and familiar white shutters, went under contract in less than 2 weeks. After closing costs and legal fees, Emma and I each received just over $175,000. I never spoke to any of them again. All communication went through attorneys. When the final check arrived, I didn't even open the envelope. I handed it to my financial advisor and told her, just make it grow. According to Jeremy, Emma used her share as a down payment on a small house out in the suburbs. My parents moved in with her and Kevin, a full household now, a baby on the way, a mortgage to carry, and more bedrooms than apologies. I didn't feel anything. Not guilt, not anger, not relief. Just quiet. Back in my apartment, the renovation was nearly done. I'd replaced the carpets with oak flooring, painted every wall, and finally bought a real headboard. The kitchen was new, not luxurious, but efficient and clean. Every improvement was a quiet declaration. I did this. Not for them. For me. One evening, I stood on my small balcony with a glass of wine watching the sky turn the color of old peaches. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an old co-worker. Emma had the baby. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Everyone's doing well. I stared at it for a moment, and then I put my phone face down. I felt nothing. No ache, no curiosity, no pull toward the child I would never meet. He'll grow up hearing stories about me, the selfish aunt who wouldn't give up her apartment, who made his family sell their home. They'll never mention how they treated me for 30 years. They'll leave out the cake, and that's fine. I moved back inside and sat on my sofa, the same old one from my studio apartment, still a little lumpy but familiar. On the shelf beside me was the shoebox. I opened it and took out the embroidered handkerchief I had retrieved it after mediation, folded it carefully, not out of sentiment, but because it belonged in the box with the rest of it. The things I carried, the things I no longer needed. Beside it, I placed the last photo I had of my grandmother. Just the two of us. I must have been 10. She's holding my hand. I'm looking up at her like she's the only solid ground I've ever known. Maybe she knew what was coming. Maybe that's why she split the house equally. One final act of balance in a family that never was. Thank you, I whispered, touching the photo's edge. And then I closed the box. No message from my mother. No letter from Emma. Not a single word. They had all the space in the world, now a whole house of it to rewrite the story without me. Let them. Because for once I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had already walked away.